questions we wrestle with as Christians about who God is, how do we live out our faith, what is the Bible, what is the truth of the Bible, what are we supposed to believe, how are we supposed to live? There are really big, deep questions that we ask each other, that we ask God, that we wrestle with ourselves. And that's why the Cultivate podcast exists, to help us go deeper in our understanding of who God is, His Word, and the way that He's called us to live. Hey everyone, welcome to the Cultivate podcast with the Grove Church. I'm Charlie Lofton, lead pastor there, and we have with us...
Hey-o.
Oh, okay.
My hands are full.
Anyways, Abigail Boone.
Yeah, man.
Abigail Boone, what you got there?
We got some airship coffee made at home.
Are you a fancy coffee person?
I am, but I am only fancy coffee at my house because I like the way I make it. But if I go and get coffee, I'm Einstein's all the way.
Okay.
Which a lot of coffee snobs would say is not
Yeah.
fancy coffee, but it is good.
Podcast producer, awesome friend, creative director, great question asker. Thanks for being with us as always.
Of course. This has been a fun series.
We are neck deep in angelology, talking about angels, Satan, demons, all those things. And we kind of ended last time saying that we were going to spend some time talking about spiritual warfare. So if there is a reality of angel and demons around us, what are we supposed to do about it? How much attention should we give to it? But before we get to that, I meant to say this last time.
Oh.
You asked 2 episodes ago, does Satan get the name Lucifer? Right? That is a Latin translation.
Okay.
Remember we talked about the passage in Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28 where it's like, is this
the story
really
of
Satan or not? Well, in the one in Isaiah 14, Satan is referred to as Morning Star.
Isn't that the company name in Parks and Rec?
Is it?
That's Ron's.
And because he's referred to as this beautiful light that then ultimately
Satan
chooses
is.
evil. Yes, and ultimately chooses evil.
Okay.
And so that he was the most beautiful of all of the angels.
Interesting.
And he kind of got fascinated with himself and turned away from God, right?
Okay.
So he's trying to put God on the same level.
Okay.
So the Latin word for
Morning Star.
Morning Star is like Lael or something like that, to which then we got the name Lucifer.
Okay.
So that is a derivative of the Latin word for morning star,
But not the same thing as like the angel word that is like a...
and so then that's how it became associated with Satan's name.
Okay.
Is through morning, the Hebrew word for morning star getting translated into Latin, and that word in Latin getting translated into English became Lucifer. It is an English pronunciation or translation of a Latin word, of a Hebrew word that means morning star, which is a title that is given to Satan if you believe Isaiah 14 is specifically referring to Satan.
Okay. So nothing like a transliteration that we talked about.
But it's a couple of languages away, right? It's of Latin.
Yeah.
As opposed to it being a transliteration of the original Hebrew.
Well, that's fascinating. You have a lot of knowledge rattling around in that mind.
Or something.
Something.
All right. So the big question, I think, for me, and you referenced this off the air.
Okay.
Is like, where do I put this?
Mm-hmm.
Where do I put this? Because I think there are a couple of avoidable extremes that we need to avoid, and somewhere in between these is what we should do. There are some people living their life as if there is not a spiritual evil force in this world actively trying to cause you harm.
Right.
And if such a thing exists and you choose to willfully ignore it, that seems to have some very obvious bad implications.
Seems to make you vulnerable.
Right. Makes you vulnerable to something. To believe something doesn't exist. I mean, the metaphor of a virus,
right?
A contagious virus is there. It's like you can believe a virus doesn't exist, but if you act as if a situation is not contagious, but it is. So you're going to go visit a friend in the hospital and they're like, hey, you need to put on all this garb first so that you can talk to them because we have them quarantined. He's like, well, I don't believe in viruses. And you just walk in, right? I'm not trying to make a COVID
I was about
reference.
to say, hey-o.
I'm not trying to do
Getting
that.
a little political today.
No. I'm trying to think.
But the thought process behind it makes sense. Right. Yeah.
On the other hand, I can be paralyzed by the knowledge that there are demons out there in the wide world. And so the question for me then is, where do we go? Well, it's somewhere in between those, somewhere between being paralyzed by it and pretending it doesn't exist. Because I think a second question that goes with that is, should I be afraid?
Well, and I also think there's a little bit of a cultural connotation that if you believe in it, you're kind of putting yourself in those horror film categories of, oh, you believe in demons. But there is an in-between. Right. You don't have to be this big extreme over here. You can be...
Right. Should I be afraid?
Right.
Right. Should I? No, but the reality is the demons should be afraid because they're scared of Jesus.
Right.
And the phrase that is very often described, that it comes from the Bible, is that greater is he that is in me than the one that's in the world. Okay, so Satan's out there in the world, and that theoretically would be scary. He's described by Peter as being a roaring lion looking for someone to devour, also scary. But that is all relative.
Yeah.
A situation can be scary, but if the person on your side is scarier, or not scary to you, but scary to them, right? I've got this guy on my side. He's 6'6", 350 and pure muscle. And the guy over there is kind of scary by myself. 6'1", 250.
Right.
Is scary, except
we have Andre the Giant.
Right. I would be scared of him if it were just me. It's not just me. It's me and him, really him.
Which could also be said about kind of what we were talking about last episode, that there is demons, but there's also your own flesh and the brokenness of the world that is really crippling and paralyzing and sad. But if you remember the redemption of Christ,
right,
then it's not as crushing.
Yeah, you need to be aware that this exists. You need to be on guard against it, but you do not to be afraid or paralyzed by it because Jesus is on your side. Jesus plus you is greater than any demon because Jesus is greater than that demon. Jesus is greater than all the demons combined. And so if I am relying on Jesus and I'm trusting in him, I don't have anything to be afraid of.
Right.
But I need to be aware of, because I don't want to behave and live like someone who doesn't need the protection of Jesus.
Right.
Because if I don't understand that there's this evil in the world, I might be naive enough to believe that I don't need this protection.
Yeah.
But I do need this protection because there is a severe threat out there. Again, not something that I need to be scared of. There's lots of things that theoretically are scary, and there's all sorts of things that come to my mind. People talk about how roller coasters are scary. Right.
Not for you.
Not if you're buckled in.
That's what puts Charlie to sleep at night.
I'm buckled.
Right. Yeah.
I'm buckled. I believe the safety restraint will protect me against the forces of inertia. And so living the experience can feel thrilling, but I don't ever think that I'm going to die.
Right.
And so the battle that happens between me and the evil in the world is intense.
Yeah.
But I don't have to be afraid that I'm going to die or be undone by it because I have all the protection that I need to be protected from it. It doesn't keep it from being a thing. It is a thing. It doesn't neutralize it to the point where I don't need to think about it, the other extreme over here. There's a reality of it that needs to be faced, but it needs to be faced with a confidence that...
Well, isn't there a verse that talks about that? We haven't been given the spirit of fear and timidity, but... I don't know the other side of the verse, but it's encouraging.
Power, love, and self-discipline.
Okay. But
it's in Timothy.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So let's get to the passage. We referenced it a little bit last time. It's kind of the definitive passage on what the battle should look like. So we are in a battle. Make it very clear, battle is real. The our general can wipe all of them out at any moment. He allows us to experience more battle sometimes than maybe we want, but I can trust in him.
Mm-hmm.
And he has given us other tools to kind of to be a part of this battle. And it is described here, Ephesians chapter 6, starting in verse 10. Finally, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. And this is your verse you reference. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. So there's this battle that is going on in spiritual realms, and Satan has schemes. We live in a dark world. He's using all of these different descriptors to kind of talk about it. Dark world. There's these forces that are organized against us. Satan has schemes, and they are out to get you/us. And so you need to recognize that this is a struggle, and you have some steps that you need to take so that you can take your stand. Parenthesis, it is also really important. Paul is saying our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but them. And I said this, I was speaking at a downline, this discipleship ministry in town, and kind of talking about this battle that David and Saul were having.
Mm-hmm.
And Saul considered David his enemy and was trying to kill him. And David refused to fight back.
Mm-hmm.
He would hide and run and do all these things, but he would never give, even though given the opportunity, would never do harm to Saul. And I use this phrase, and I think it is applicable here, which is just because someone decides that you're their enemy, you are my enemy,
doesn't mean you have to.
Doesn't mean I have to agree that
I'm yours.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. You think I'm your enemy, okay, but you're not mine.
Yeah.
And I think that's a little bit what Paul is saying here. There are maybe people out there, forces in this world that would declare you an enemy, and that doesn't mean those people are your enemy. That's what Paul's saying. People aren't your enemy.
Mm-hmm.
There's a system out there that needs to be opposed, and there is a demonic presence that needs to be opposed. People are not the enemy. And I feel like I can't say that enough, especially in the world that we live in right now with the elevated rhetoric that we live on. People are not our enemies.
Yeah.
People who think differently, act differently, worship differently, believe differently, vote differently.
Yeah.
There is a battle out there, but it is against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Therefore, put on the full armor of God so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground, and after you have done everything, to stand. And so there's an armor metaphor here, right? That means there's a battle. It means you're going to take blows. You don't need armor unless you're going to take some hits.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to take these hits. And it's interesting what he says here. You put all this armor on for what reason?
To stand.
To stand.
Right.
Which is different than
fight. Yeah.
Conquer.
Mm-hmm.
Conquering spiritual evil and demons. I mean, that's not a battle we can even be involved in.
Right.
I can't see them.
You should always be swatting the air when you walk.
But they have spiritual attacks that they can do on me, and I need to be able to stand.
Yeah.
And so I have these things that allow me then to stand strong, to face an enemy attack that I can't really counterattack in a way that does like damage to the demon.
Right.
I mean, so it is really about protection and being able to stand. And the reason I think stand is even such a good word beyond just protect is just like I have something that I'm supposed to do, and I need to we use the phrase, I need to take a stand. I need to be strong. And there's a strength and a power in that of just like, whatever blows I'm taking, I'm still being who God has called me to be. And so there's the spiritual, how do you fight back against a spiritual attack when if you kind of swung at me, I may not be great at it. I know how to protect myself physically.
Mm-hmm.
How do you protect yourself against an attack that you can't see?
Right.
You only feel, and you can't really fight back.
Yeah.
And so then he uses an armor metaphor. Stand firm then with the belt of truth buckled around your waist, with the breastplate of righteousness in place, and with your feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. In addition to all of this, take up the shield of faith, which you can with which you can extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one. Take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. And so there have been plenty of people out there in the wide, wide world who have just kind of gone neck deep into this armor metaphor to say, specifically, this is what protects your chest, which is where your heart is, and that's why this matters, and a shield. Right. But okay, I'm not that into this.
Sure.
But there are a few key things here. It's like truth, righteousness, the gospel of peace, a shield of faith, a helmet of salvation. I mean, all of these things, a lot of them are centered around a knowledge and an awareness and a connection to Jesus and the gospel.
So it's calling you to not be moved by these spiritual forces and remember.
Right. If I keep my mind focused on the salvation that I have, it will protect me. If I have a desire and move forward to do right, I'm gonna put on a breastplate of righteousness. This is a desire to do right, to be right, to live right. If I do that, I am protected. A helmet of salvation, a shield of faith. I mean, there's gonna be things that are gonna throw at you. Abigail, you're not good enough. God's not real, right? And there's just a sense of like, I believe in who God is and who God says I am. I mean, a lot of our biggest, we say battling our demons,
right,
come to the way that we view ourselves.
Yeah.
I am worthless. I'm no good. I'll never amount to anything. I'm awful. I should never even have existed. It'd be better if I weren't here. Those sorts of kind of next level sorts of things. Well, I believe what God says about me, which is I am fearfully and wonderfully made and created in his image, and I choose to believe that. Well, but look all around you. Look at how awful this world is. You don't matter in this world. Well, I believe that God said I mattered, and so I believe that. I mean, there's just there's a sense of which the kind of these things, like what I choose to believe about God matters. What I think about my salvation matters. The way that I choose to live my life matters. And again, all of these things are defensive tools. The one offensive tool in here is the word of God.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Is the sword. Right? And so, and that's what you see in the way that Jesus interacts with Satan. He doesn't try to physically bully him. He doesn't try to outlogic him. He just simply quotes scripture at him.
Yeah.
And that is the way that he attacks these problems. Genesis 1 says, I am created in the image of God. John 3:16 says that God so loved the world that he gave his son that I could have everlasting life. Well, that doesn't count for you. Sure it does, because John 1:12 says to me that as many as received him to believe in his name became the right to become children of God. And I know that I believe in his name and that I've received him. And so I am a child of God. And so it is a forward attack against a spiritual thing. Again, you're not going to do any damage to them, but you're doing damage to the argument.
In protecting.
Here's a lie. Here's truth.
Yeah.
And so, I'm choosing to be right. I am believing God, and I am speaking this truth. And now I can stand strong against it. And so when those thoughts kind of enter into your head and you start to feel oppressed, you start to feel hurt, you start to feel devalued, there are some tools that he's given. And there's some people that even will go so far as to imagine themselves putting things on.
But it makes me think of, I don't remember what context we've talked about this before, but taking the Bible literally, I think it's literally true. Do I think I need to go out and buy a knight's armor suit? No.
They sell that for kids for sure.
They do, yeah.
Pretty
but
cool.
I think it shows me, you're kind of convincing me of the practicality, I guess, of knowing this stuff, because In other parts, Paul uses the imagery of like running a race, and that's not
Mhm.
like the most important thing in life, but you can live without running a race if you want to. But this is a military war metaphor, giving it a weight of importance that you should
Right.
know these things, but also know that you have the ability to fight against it with knowing God.
And there is a real battle out there.
Yeah.
We will spend most of our time in our hamartiology sin section talking about the reality of me as a sinner. And we'll spend some time in Galatians 5 talking about battling the spirit versus the flesh. And we'll talk about that again with our pneumatology. And because, again, I said this before in the previous episode, I'll say it again right now. I do believe our greatest enemy in us being who God has called us to be is me. I am my worst enemy, and battling my own instincts is pretty severe. But that's not to say that there is not a spiritual battle out there of someone who is trying to discourage me, dissuade me, and get me off the path. And I feel it sometimes. And we have been given tools to battle that.
Yeah.
Again, I don't become so obsessed with it that it cripples me, and I don't become so focused on it that I choose to outsource the blame for my own sin.
Right.
My sin is my issue. I chose to make a decision, but I also chose to not prepare myself against the spiritual battle that I have to fight every day. And I fight that with truth, faith, knowledge of the gospel, choosing to live a right life, all of these different pieces that come together to protect me. And so if we recognize the severity of the situation, the reality of the situation, and recognize that God has given us tools to equip us, then we can better fight the battle, so that then maybe my only demons that I'm having to battle are just the internal ones.
Right.
My flesh. I can spend most of my time focusing on the bigger issue, which is my own inward desires that are pulling me, rather than getting tripped up and distracted, oppressed, and ultimately devoured by an enemy that I chose in my Western intellect to believe didn't really exist.
Yeah.
Because only simpletons would believe that.
Well, I was going to ask you, do you feel like there's we don't live in a world that naturally leans towards, I know that we're not necessarily mystics, but this feels mystical to an extent, that there's some people that probably are just atheist, or they don't believe in spiritual realms, so they could just totally ignore this because they think it's antiquated, or simple ones believe in something like this.
Again, when we started with this by talking about, and I think this is a good way for us to close this one, like where do I put this? And I said, well, there's two extremes that we need to avoid. Pretending it doesn't exist and being overwhelmed by it. And I think if we were to travel the wide world together, we would see two distinct cultures out there. One group that has determined that they are too smart to believe this sort of naivete, and they have a certain type of evil in those cultures.
Yeah.
Greed, self-reliance, arrogance, selfishness, entitlement. And then we would find cultures that are overwhelmed by the reality of spiritual forces. And there is a different sort of evil that exists there. And so I think we need to avoid these two extremes, because I think history tells us that those are his two primary strategies in how to pull us away from God.
Yeah.
One is to convince us, like he convinced himself, that we are smart enough and good enough to live without him, and none of this is even real. And the other one is, you are so crippled and oppressed by evil, you will never amount to anything. Life and in this world are hopeless. And both of those strategies have a particular effect to them, but both of them have the same result of keeping you from putting your faith and trust truly in God.
Right.
And so avoiding both of those two extremes allows us then to kind of live a third path that will just keep us, lack of a better word, just kind of more balanced in this area and have just be a little more sober-minded in our approach to our spiritual life.
Yeah.
So anyways, thank you for joining us in this 3-week journey and talking about the spiritual world that is out there. And I don't know how close I came to
that was awesome.
convincing
I loved
you
it.
that this
You
mattered.
did.
Okay, well, there you go. There you go. Hope it did for you too. And we will continue on with this over the next several weeks. We will spend some time talking next about anthropology, the study of people. We kind of touched on some of that already, talking about being created in the image of God. That's where we'll end up next. And so I invite you to join us for that. If you have any questions, you can let me know at charlie@thegrovechurch.org. And if you would love more information about our church, you can find us at thegrovechurch.org/connect. Thanks again for joining us. Thank you for listening to the Cultivate podcast. Our hope is that you are taking steps to go deeper in your faith, that you are asking big questions and you're looking for answers. We hope that we can be a resource for you through our podcast and any other way that we can help you. You can find all our episodes anywhere that you can find podcasts, including YouTube. And again, thank you so much for joining us.